for me, understanding dungeon philosophy is just as important as dungeon reality, because understanding what can and can't change over the course of a 2-year expansion is very important when pugging. It's important to understand what Blizzard wanted to happen in these scenarios, because then it's easier to find ways to overcome those challenges. So this is kind of step one in dungeon tuning, and I think it's just as important. I've been trying to make these videos on, people getting the information they need for Mythic Plus coming out of the beta into Shadowlands release proper. And this is a big step in that. Like, understanding what has changed in these dungeons as well is going to be very important. And again, what might change in the future. So let's talk a little bit about it. We're going to go through it. Now, they're going to start off here with like Echelon Stone Leap. Damage has been decreased by 25% and now applies a dot. So this says when you couldn't dodge the leap, it would quickly get to one-shot level. So a lot of these things have like a little commentary on them up here, but that's kind of the going theme here, is that like things were getting out of control numerically. And I do think this is because people were pushing the boundaries to levels that they shouldn't have been at in the beta. So if this is Blizzard's response to that, that's quite fair, actually. I was worried that they were only going to make things harder because people were able to do it, but it's good that they understand, where things would have gotten out of control. So like, for example, they nerfed this. It's a mechanic second boss in the dungeon. He leaps. You're supposed to make him leap onto ads, so he breaks them. But apparently it was just doing too much damage at the higher keys. So now they make it do a much less damage, and then I guess apply a dot. So it's like a little bit easier to deal with, but it's still the same amount of damage. And then they made a change to trash here. Now, this is commonly considered one of the easiest dungeons, if not probably the easiest so far. And this shard of healthiest is actually the name of the first boss, but the shard of him is like the trash that you have to kill to unlock him. Basically, there's 3 kind of like church elementals that you have to kill. And they all they do is this. This is the only mechanic they do, is this thrash. They just kind of pound the ground, and you have to heal through it, or whatever. But it's kind of surprising to me, because I guess what people have been doing is, like, since it's mandatory, they like pull all the other trash like that they need for count into that guy, and they kill it all together, because realistically it doesn't actually do that much. So I'm kind of surprised that they nerfed this, and to me it feels like they nerfed it because they're like, well, the big pulls that people are doing are so dangerous that they'll never survive with the thrash damage on top of that. But it's like, to me, that seems like the wrong approach. It's like, well, you want to incentivize people to pull solo if they need to, right? Like, to me, that's what I would do. But I guess Blizzard's like kind of just giving up on that. They're like, nah, we're not gonna be able to make that happen. Nobody's ever gonna pull this mob alone. So we'll just make it not completely wipe you when people need to do it, which is, that's, you might learn something from that, the philosophy, as much as you might learn from, the others. So anyway, Mists of Tirna side, this is the one with the funny maze thing in the middle, and is crazy. Mistcaller's guessing game damage increased to 100%. Damage reduction increased to 100%, up from 99. So if you don't know what's going on here, the boss, it does like a guessing game thing. You have to choose which one you have to kill. And while you're doing that, the boss is meant to be like immune. Now, it happens all the time where the boss is at like 1% health as she does a guessing game, which absolutely sucks. So this is the other, I would have said maybe like 75% damage reduction. But the thing is, you can't really allow that, because then people are just never going to do the guessing game. They're just going to burn through it. So instead, they completely block this out. Basically, they should just probably make her go away, because 100% damage reduction is a little unfair to the tank, especially tanks that are, relying on maybe leech or something like that. But regardless, you can now do 0 damage to her while there's 4 ads. You have to figure out which one you have to kill. And if you fail to kill the right one, like if you kill the wrong one, this happens. Penalizing burst damage has been decreased by 10%. Now, I don't know, 10% not that big of a deal, but yeah, people kill the wrong one all the time. I'm telling you what, if you have not watched a video, if you do not know anything about this dungeon, if you're hearing this dungeon's name for the first time, stop. You can keep watching if you want, but watch that next, okay? Because this is the most important dungeon in the game for pugging. If you've never done a dungeon with a pug before and you're doing it for the first time in Shadowlands, this dungeon is going to break groups. It's going to it might break you. I don't want this to happen, okay? It's the most complicated. It's unbelievable. It's going to be like relatively easy for coordinated groups, but it's going to be an absolute nightmare for pugs. If 5 people don't know what they're doing, you will literally not be able to complete the dungeon. That's not an exaggeration. So they're changing some things here. It doesn't really change anything about that. but they are making it slightly easier. So if you make a mistake at that point in the encounter, it should wipe you less, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, Tredova's Parasitic Domination now shields players for 50% of their maximum health. So this was something that I noticed, I think, earlier in the week, or like before the build. So I don't know. Maybe they're changing something even further, but basically this used to just be so, like, the value was so off that you could accidentally kill your partner very easily. And it's like it's a mind control. You're meant to break a threshold of damage, and then you're no longer mind controlled. But yeah, it would literally, like, you can just kill the guy very easily. Like, they don't, you do so much damage, and they don't have that much health. So I would grip them in, and they would just die. So I would stop doing that. But yeah, anyway, they made it now 50% of maximum health value instead of a flat value. And I don't know, it could be the other way around. Maybe the value got so high on higher keys that it was just impossible to kill them. But that's all I've seen. Mistfell Tenders nourish the forest. So we talked a lot about this in that video. Just a constant cast. They're trying to cast this heal on people. So just got to kick this. Nothing special. I'm not really sure what the change pertains to here. I assume that it was healing for way too little, probably on higher keys. So that's fine. And then these are mobs at the end of the dungeon. I'm pretty sure the fact that I don't know what this mob is probably tells me it's nothing. But Acid Gullet sounds like either the flying. I don't think it's going to be the flying mobs, but maybe it is. It might actually be, but it's definitely one of the mobs at the end. Just does less damage. I mean, it's not really anything special from what I can tell. So, Necrotic Wake. Now, this is not. This dungeon is the one that I think needed changes the most, and the fact that they got 0 besides this, I'm not a big fan of that, but we'll see how it plays out. Now Thor's Comet Storm damage has been decreased by 14%. So if you don't know what that is, that's you fight him in a very limited space. He's calling down these comets. If you get hit by one, it hits like 5 times, I believe. If you get hit by one, you take more damage from the next one. So it's meant to be like, if you're standing in that, you die 100%. But if you move and you get hit by one maybe on the way out, you're going to be fine. The fact that they nerfed the damage taken, it's like, what are they going here? What are you after here? You put in a mechanic where it's like you're not meant to get hit by it twice, otherwise you die. So why decrease the damage? Just make it literally do like one shot level at 2. Because so what? Like, is the point to be like on a lower key you can get hit by it 4 or 5 times and still live? I don't understand why they would nerf this, because you're not meant to be hit by it ever, right? Like, that's the whole fight. There's like 3 mechanics, and one of them is you can accidentally get rooted or be in a position where you can't move out of this mechanic, and that would be a mistake, either strategically or like an overarching error that the whole group has made. So I don't really understand that. I'm kind of frustrated by that, because that dungeon has some things in it that are clearly overtuned, and it's the dungeon I've given the most feedback on since it was the first dungeon. Basically no changes in that dungeon. I don't know. Maybe there's more, because the thing is, I've done some of these dungeons, and there's definitely been more changes than what Wowhead is listed here. I'm kind of disappointed that they haven't updated this, because there's a lot more than just this. But yeah, if I assume there's probably more going on in that dungeon than just that. Anyway, Plaguefall, this dungeon that's been on a lot of people's tongues for a long time now. It's very interesting, very open dungeon. And I guess a lot of people have been using these unstable canisters to deal with trash, kind of like the spotters in Siege of Borealis. I absolutely hate this concept. Really don't. Like, it's my least favorite thing ever, especially when pugging. But fair enough, it's there, so people will learn to use it well. The thing is, it now, I guess it used to do 80% of the health of the target or something like that. Now it does a lot less or more. It's hard to tell, right? Because we don't know if it scales with key level, as we said. If it's say, I don't know what that number looks like, but if it's 11,000 at any level, then that's going to be absolutely nothing at high keys, right? Like, at the higher key level, that's going to do very, 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 very little. Well, depending on how long the mobs are alive for. But it's not, if it doesn't scale with key level, it's like that. But if it does scale with key level, then it could continue to be really, really powerful. I think the bigger change here, though, is that can be dispelled with the disease dispel. You might have seen people do this dungeon and the tank just gets one shot. I've had it happen multiple times myself, actually. So it's kind of difficult to keep. I don't know how you're meant to even do it, how you're meant to keep the mobs near it and then not die yourself. But anyway, that's now dispellable. And of course, like, the disease can be dispelled by players, but the enemies, they don't have any way to dispel it. So Now this is a boss, the final. It's like the third boss. But Faxi actually brought this up on stream the other day when we were doing the dungeon. He was asking what this mechanic even was. The way it works is there's these webs on the ground, comes out like relatively frequently on the fight, and you have to run over the webs to find these mobs that are throwing something at you. If you don't do it, they just constantly throw stuff at you. And if you do it, you risk being too far away from each other, so you get stunned and whatever that mechanic is. But is it worth it was his question. Like, why not just, not discover them and then keep killing the boss? And it's because of this mechanic, assassinate. So it's basically just nature damage, poison daggers being thrown at you, and it's stacking. So like there's 4 of them. I think they can just throw it at any random player. I don't think it's just a tank or something. So yeah, if they keep throwing it, if all 4 are just constantly throwing it, you're gonna have dozens of stacks, and people are just gonna get destroyed, I assume. But then they nerf it. So it's like they nerfed the periodic. Oh, I guess they nerfed the periodic damage, which like I don't know how much that's meant to attribute to the danger of them. I think the reason they did that was because it's like we wanted them to kill you outright, not kill you afterwards. You know what I mean? So it kind of does make sense. But yeah, I do see a lot of people probably not killing these mobs, literally just letting them kill. Letting them just stay there and kill the boss. But we'll see about that. And then this pestilence slime viral globs cast time. I mean, from what I can tell, this does absolutely nothing. They changed the cast time on it for some reason. I don't. Maybe I'm missing something about that, but it's just some random mob that you just fight and it just does very little. So yeah, another one of those weird changes. Sanguine depths. Now this one, when you see a list of changes like this, you're starting to think like, well, what did you miss from the other dungeons then? Because there's no way, I don't believe that that's possible, that they changed this much stuff. You know what I'm saying? There's no possible way that they changed this much stuff in one dungeon and not in the others. But it was looked at as one of the harder dungeons, and we did it a lot. That video is going to be out this week too about Sanguine depths. So let's take a look at it. So Chirixus the Voracious. This is the first boss of the dungeon, and he's had dramatic swings. So the damage increased by 220% of a cast. Now this is very similar to an Arcway mechanic where you have to interrupt him. He's always going to get like a little buff kind of thing. But if you don't interrupt him, he gets a really big, he does something really bad. Let's put it that way. So yeah, you want to interrupt this. I guess this is just like nobody was really caring about it at all. Like obviously like it's supposed to be interrupted and it's not hard to interrupt, but like maybe it wasn't punishing enough, so they buffed the hell out of it. I tell you what was punishing enough, Severing Smash. Now I did this dungeon yesterday and we did it on a pretty low key, and I didn't really feel like it was 328% increased. Maybe it was just doing very little. The way it works is it hits you, and then it's meant to spawn an orb that if it gets to the boss, it does a ton of damage. So what they didn't change was the living essence. I believe that's what they would have changed if they wanted to make that more or less damage. What instead they did was the actual knockback. He's like kind of like hits the ground and you kind of fly backwards. I don't think the actual damage from the second part of the mechanic has been altered in this, because if that was the case, then this is a ridiculous change. It doesn't make any sense. But this is just making it so like you actually take damage when you get knocked back. And I think the goal there is that it's like, oh, well, we're already kind of low, so you got to wait. I think honestly what they want is all like players all on one side of the boss, and then you just kite him. I think that's honestly what the strategy is going to look like in the end. So you never deal with this mechanic. But I don't know how what the reality of that is going to look like. So anyway, they just made this do a lot more damage. And then Vicious Headbutt, damage reduced by 10%. This is actually really dangerous. It's kind of like his tank breaker mechanic. He does a lot of damage with this. And it knocks you back too. You can be avoided. It can be avoided in a couple ways, obviously. But the big thing for DK was like I basically had to like not get knocked back because the hits were so hard that if I didn't get back in range to Death Strike quickly, he might kill me with autos. So anyway, that's yeah. I mean, they reduced that by a small percentage, so we'll see what that looks like. Now, this is the third boss, and I'm going to say the third boss was definitely the one that was the most overtuned in the dungeon. It just seemed like ridiculous, almost like impossible, and this was on Fortified. Rite of Supremacy is a kind of a big AoE that she does, and it's like kind of avoidable in some ways. You can watch the video when I make it, but it's not meant to kill you when you have the avoidance. Let's put it this way. And it was still doing that. We had people with, you know, like they had done the mechanic well, and they were still dying. So I don't. It was just way overtuned. Honestly, 12.5% doesn't seem right. Like first, well, actually, maybe because the damage was so high. You see, 20,000 is the base, where we're talking about 2,000 for some of these other mechanics. So yeah, it's a huge thing. The bigger thing though was the agonize, and this has been nerfed substantially. Damage has been decreased by 40%, and the duration was reduced to 2 seconds. So yeah, I'd say that this is actually the hardest part of the fight, because this gets you low. If you do the mechanic well, it shouldn't kill you, but then you just die to this, because right afterwards there's like so it's right after a ton of healing required there, and then all of a sudden you have to constantly move as a unit. So many healers obviously struggling to heal through that. Now the fourth boss, final boss, was actually nerfed too, and this one I just don't really get. I did it this week, and it was let's put it this way: it was very noticeable. These changes were very noticeable, but when I did it in like a more coordinated group, like a slightly higher key, it was like, wow, that did a lot of damage anyway at that point. So I don't know. This is kind of crazy. This is Wicked Gash. So what she charges puts a bleed on you. Long story short, you can get hit by other people's. You can make mistakes with it, but they buffed the damage that it does. The big thing is they completely buffed the damage it does over time. So I'm still not really sure what you're meant to do with this, because there's a mechanic on the fight that you could use to remove the bleed. Now, if you don't use that, you're done. Like that, I mean, that's ridiculous. That's a huge buff. And I could see like the people. This guy had like, I think he had like 3 or 4 stacks, and his health was like boom, 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 boom. And the healer was pumping everything into him, and he was still taking that much health. Yeah, so it's crazy. But the Gloom Squall damage has been decreased. Now, this is completely like, if you get hit by this, you die. So it's almost like, it's kind of nice that they changed it, because you could prevent it with the shield mechanic, and then you still take damage, a little bit damage, but it's like nice that now, okay, so basically I would say like, you should do 0. This should take 0 damage. So if this did 0 damage and this did 100% more damage, then I'd be like, oh, that seems like what I would do. You know what I mean? But I don't know what they're going for there. Anyway, that fight's like really easy. It's very mechanically inert. There's not a lot going on. So I think that's probably why they did that. They wanted there to be some like actual tangible difficulty. Now, there's some big changes to the trash. And again, this is where it starts to think this is where I start to think like, okay, if there's this much changes to the trash in here, there's no way that nothing changed in some of these other dungeons. But anyway, this is kind of like a little mini boss in the middle of the dungeon. I don't think it's skippable, but maybe it is. He does like a big bludgeoning bash, and it used to do like 0 damage. Now it does more than 0, so that's good. Vestige of Doubt, Crushing Doubt. This is mostly just generic trash, like mobs that were like, kind of just random things you fought along the way. They didn't really do anything. I don't understand the purpose. I think a lot of these are just casts, so they're trying to make the casts more difficult, and they want people to actually care about them. Because, in Shadow, if you haven't seen a lot of Shadowlands dungeons, there's so many casts. I think it's honestly like they're trying to overwhelm you with casts so you don't feel like you need interrupts. Like, you're not going to get every one of these casts. It's not possible. So you have to choose, what do I want to interrupt? Do I want to interrupt 1, 2, or 3? Well, 2's a slow, but 3's damage. You know what I mean? Like, you have to figure that out. So anyway, I think that's what they're going for here. They're making the things that are just damage, they're making them way harder, or something else like that. So now this is probably the biggest change. This was absolutely destroying us. Regal Mist Dancers are now suddenly the hardest mobs in here. If you haven't seen it, basically it kind of does like a little rapier slash forward, and then they leave an echo of themselves. So if the first one's like this direction, and then you turn the mob facing this direction, then 2 will happen. You see? And then wherever the third one ended, can't really, you get my point. Like there's eventually going to be like, they're going to be coming from like multiple angles if you keep turning or moving the mobs. But you kind of have no option to do that, because like you have to do that because there's too many mechanics happening on the trash. So this is ridiculous. I watched a guy get hit by 2. I think it was maybe 2 or 3. And he just got demolished, like one shot. So they buffed the hell out of this. This is a very, very difficult mechanic to dodge. And then this fiery cantrip. I noticed this when we were playing. I don't understand why they buffed this by 150%. It must have just done very, very little, because it's on these mobs that are like, I don't even think they're elites. I'm not sure what the purpose of this spell is. It just does damage, I think. That's literally it. The whole mob it's just like a book or something like that. Very weird looking mob. I don't understand why it's even in the dungeon, but and then same with some of this stuff. Like, so they decrease the damage of this. This is like another mob in that area that I don't know why it's even there. And then another mob in that area does more things. So it's that stretch of trash has just like been nerfed or buffed in multiple different ways. But here's another really important one. Grant Overs here. This is actually important. Overbearing Presence. This might be one of the most complicated. Like, this is a very interesting mechanic for 5-mans. It makes you do less damage and healing per stack, and there's no way to stop the stack. Now, I haven't tried everything. I know AMS works, but I haven't tried, like, if you can line of sight the mob or something. I don't know. But it lasts for a long time. I think it's 30 seconds or something like that. So what might happen here, if you chain pull, you're done. You're going to do, like, no damage. You know what I mean? It does stack up to a maximum, though. I think it's 20 stacks. So before it was 20 times 3%, now it's 20 times 2%. So yeah, it's going to be a lot less punishing, but still, I do think like you're going to be waiting in between pulls on these mobs because it's like, I'm not trying to go into the next pack with a big damage reduction. I don't know. So anyway, Frenzied Ghoul, or maybe it's 15 stacks, because I think, yeah. Anyway, Frenzied Ghoul Shadow Claw damage has been increased by 180%. I literally don't know what this is. Frenzied Ghoul? Where the hell is there a ghoul in this dungeon? I'm unaware of this. The only thing I can think of is one of these weird rooms that you don't pull. But I actually don't know. Maybe that it's just not what I expect it to look like. But when I think of a ghoul, I think of something undead, and I don't think there's an undead in this dungeon, so I don't know. Insatiable Brute. Honestly, I feel like this isn't the wrong dungeon. I feel like this is from the wrong dungeon. But anyway, Insatiable Brute's slam has been reduced. So this is a mob that looks very similar to the first boss. It's like the same model, actually. It's just smaller. And it's kind of similar mechanics. The slam is like a big tank breaker, and on Fortified, it was destroying me. And even on like with no affixes at all a while back, it was destroying me. So a small nerf to that. It is going to be a knockback, and it's going to meant to be very damaging, but hopefully a lot of people will, they'll pull them conservatively. If you're pulling 2 of these, I don't know how you would ever live. But if you're only fighting 1, it's fine. And then they do a similar mechanic like the boss. They knock people back. The thing is, it's an AoE that can't be avoided. But I guess if you're close to where he jumps, he heals or something. I've never actually noticed this. But yeah, the fact that it does like unavoidable damage to everybody in the group was kind of ridiculous. So hopefully that is a nice nerf. Stonewall Gargan. These are just the dogs or whatever at the end. They look like kind of bears, like kind of combined with dogs. And I don't think they did anything at all. So that's probably why they buffed them. It's part of like a gauntlet. And I was honestly like, I never even cared about these dogs. They did 0. So hopefully they will do more now. But I still didn't notice them when we fought that gauntlet the other day. Wicked Oppressor's Rack Soul. This is a good change here because there's a lot of casters in this dungeon. Like I said, in this one section has like 4 of these, and you're just always gonna, you're not gonna get interrupts, right? So what they changed then instead was they nerfed the initial damage, and then they made it kind of on the healer at that point because it can be dispelled. So magic dispel. So it's like, all right, so now it's on you. You got to pick who you want to dispel. I quite like that. That's a really intelligent change in my opinion, and I would like to see that happen more. I would like to see that a lot more in some dungeons with these casts. Make it so it's like, okay, well, we failed to interrupt. How do you deal with it now? Like, if you fail to interrupt and you get 1 shot, it's like, oh, come on, interrupt, you idiot. But now it's like, okay, well, we failed to interrupt, not the end of the world. I could carry this now as the healer, or even as somebody who can get it off themselves with an immunity or something, maybe, So, and Spires of Ascension. Actually, we're going to do Theater of Pain first, because I want to come back to Spires of Ascension. This is nothing really. First boss, like a bunch of casters. There's like 2 casters in the first boss. One of them is Passeron, I believe, and it just does more damage. So that's nothing really. I think that first boss was just the fact that I don't actually know what's going on in that first boss after doing that dungeon that much. Kind of tells you everything you need to know. I expect more changes to come. And then this is that stupid freaking Lich fight. I really don't like this fight. I still don't really properly understand it, but they basically buffed some things. He summons hands that I think you're actually meant to walk into for some reason, but or maybe you're supposed to make the souls walk into them. I'm not really sure, but either way, the damage over time has been increased by 10 seconds. So, yeah, I don't know. Phantasmal Parasite has been nerfed. This is another one of those mechanics on that fight, and it just does less damage now. And then Soulless, damage increased by 60%. While separated from your soul, the player's body suffers from all that shadow damage and then prevents all actions and spellcasting. So to me, it's like you can't damage or cast anything. So why does it do damage at all? I don't really understand the point. It's like already a major penalty, but it's also going to kill you now. So it's like, I hate that fight. I think that's one of the worst fights in the game, but I still don't fully understand it, I suppose. Okay, so let's talk about this, because this is one that changed a lot more than that. It's mostly the last boss that changed, so we'll talk about that. So anyway, Kintara, this is the first boss. Ionized plasma damage increased by a lot, 68%. So what she does is she throws a spear out. That video's been live, by the way, if you haven't seen Spires of Ascension. She throws a spear at a target. You can't avoid the spear, but then it puts down a little puddle on the ground. And the puddle is now a lot more dangerous. I stood in it by accident as a tank. He did not throw the spear at me, and I still stood in it. And it did a lot of damage, even as a tank. So, and I believe it's magic, right? Yeah, it's arcane. And then this deep connection is like, it connects the two targets on the fight are connected with this line. And if you're standing in the line, you're getting this stacking arcane damage down. I got 3 stacks of it yesterday, and I almost died to it. I had to AMS, so it does a lot more damage now. And again, this is on a fortified week, so. And then we have Devos' Lost Confidence, damage increased by 20%. So very interesting. This is a fight that has changed significantly. So let's go through all the trash, and then I'm going to tell you a little about this change, because they really changed this fight, and I want to bring it up. But anyway, Forsworn Castigator, so we talked about that. This is just more like cast, kind of, what are you going to choose to interrupt? This is what I was talking about in the previous dungeon. There's a lot of that in this dungeon too. Forsworn Devastator, Dark Pulse, damage is increased by 48%, and this is another one. We did the dungeon, and it didn't really seem like it was that bad, but it chunked people. I think we did it on like a 6 or 7 or something like that, and it hit people for like 20% of their health. It's just like a giant robot. He looks like he's really powerful, and all he kind of does is this long cast, and if you let it go off, it's going to kill, assumingly on a high Q, it's going to kill somebody, but it probably wasn't killing people. You know what I mean? So that's why they buffed it so much. Forsworn Justicar, Forced Confession. That's another big damage. If you remember it, yeah, it makes like an AoE happen around the player too. These are the mobs that like just never stay in melee range, and they do even more damage. So that's just spectacular. I don't necessarily know if their hurl, like if you're in melee range, maybe they can't do the hurl. Maybe that's the mechanic. But I hate these mobs. I hate stuff like this as a tank because it really makes DK feel absolutely mandatory. Anyway, other divers, these are like the little birds flying around. This is ridiculous. I mean, I can't even believe this. There's a pack of like 5 of them at one point, and I got all 5 stacks on me, and I literally just died the first tick. So now that they buffed it by 60%, I can't even imagine what it would be like. But it is a magic dispel, and it is avoidable in multiple ways. AMS, of course. So yeah, I don't know. It's meant to be avoided, I assume, but I don't know. That's the reality of that happening is low. And then they also do another thing, which I don't even really know about this, just as like a damage. If you stand in the pool, you take a bunch of damage, so don't do that. It's easy. Forsworn Inquisitor, Infernal Strife is another one. Damage decreased by 25% though, but the splash damage is increased by 100%. Yeah, so that's another one of those. Like, it's just all kinds of casts, dozens of different casts throughout the dungeon, and you got to pick and choose what you want and what you don't want to go through, because you're never going to get them all. Kyrian Dark Praetor. Now, this is one that I just don't understand this at all. This mob is probably the easiest mob in the whole dungeon, and they nerfed his Swift Slice, which is, if you remember watching the video, the charge actually like caused him to charge out of bounds, and then he would just kind of sit out there. That doesn't happen anymore, luckily, but yeah, I don't know, a 75%. I guess because it's like happening so often or something. I don't know why they would nerf that, but okay, so let's talk about this last boss. Okay, so this is a really big change. It's not something that WoW had covered. So to me, this tells me that they missed other stuff. Okay, Devos' Lost Confidence damage increased by 20%. So basically, this is it puts like a circle on the player, and you got to choose one of 2 people are going to get it. 2 people total are going to get it, and one of them is going to have to be dispelled. Like, you can't have it on both for the whole time. You have to dispel one. But there's, it's a magic dispel, so realistically you're only going to be able to get one off. Now, when it drops, it puts a puddle on the ground, Lingering Doubt. That doesn't seem to be changed, okay? At least not according to Wowhead. But the whole concept of the fight has changed. When I talked about this fight last time, It was all about, like, the shield went down. Hopefully you've seen that. If you haven't seen that, you're not really going to understand this. But the shield went down. You then had like a few seconds to get into the shield. But she would then charge, okay? So if she charges everybody stacked up, it's going to do a lot of freaking damage. So instead, what I recommended was shield goes down, bait the charge happens, run in. That was the order. Now they changed this entirely. Now the shield goes down like well earlier, okay? Shield's much bigger too, it looks like. But the thing is, she then charges like out of order. So instead, what you're dealing with while you're in the shield, instead of baiting the charge, so the charge is like before the shield, or maybe it's still after the shield, but the shield is so early that just you don't need to get there. The Seed of Doubt doesn't happen for like 50% of the duration that it used to, right? It's well past it. So shield's down, maybe charge is in play. Probably not now. It's completely out of play. Instead, what's in play is the circles. So the circles go out, 2 players in the freaking shield, okay? Guess what they're going to do? They're going to try to spread out, and they're going to move out of the bubble. It happened every single pull. We killed it just because we had all the reses up, and I just res people. Every single freaking time they're in the bubble, Seed of Doubt comes out, they get the 2 circle mechanics. You're meant to dispel, but it drops a patch. Dispel or drop the patch cause players to disperse. They move out of that bubble and they get walloped. You know what I mean? One shot by the Seed of Doubt or whatever. So that's a big change. So I did not notice that in the other dungeons we did. We didn't do a lot of different dungeons, but I did not notice anything like that in any other dungeon. But that is a major change, and Wowhide did not recognize it. There's no post about it. There's no talk about it. So these are the kind of things that you got to think about. There's going to be major changes to dungeons, and they're not necessarily going to be known. In the past, like I've always kind of gone to Reddit for these types of things because people get like they coagulate there almost, and they kind of just like, here's what I found, and here's what I found, and then it kind of turns into a big post. So keep your eyes open. So there's gonna be a lot of changes. So if you have any questions about any of this stuff, let me know. It's a lot of it does seem like it's pointless to talk about, but to me, it's important to understand why they're making the changes. Because like for example, like this is a great example here. So they made it so you can't kill the boss during guessing game, but then they made it for a little bit less punishing if you fail the guessing game. So to me, what they're trying to do is they're trying to make guessing game the main mechanic of the fight, and there's no way to skip it. But if you deal with it poorly, it's not the end of the world. That to me, I now changed my opinion of that fight because of that. And there's a bunch of examples like that. So hopefully that will help you from my perspective. If not, you don't know anything about any of this stuff, I'm going to be making a video on every dungeon a lot throughout and whenever anything changes in these dungeons, what I plan on doing was making like a topic video for dungeons. You know what I mean? We used to cover BFA dungeons in certain ways, but this is going to be more ongoing throughout the expansion. So I hope to help everybody out there who's pugging or is new in general to dungeons. Get ready now. Stop. If you know anybody who's like going to be playing Shadowlands, and you have the slightest inkling that they're serious, they want to come back and they want to be serious about Shadowlands dungeons, but you're not sure where they're at yet, get prepared now. Tell them to get prepared now. I will help. I will do anything in my power to help. That's why I'm making the video. So please let everybody know that getting prepared now is good, because it doesn't just help you, it helps me too. Because if I'm pugging with people who don't know what they're doing, I have to teach them anyway. Like, it's just going to be a waste of my time. Not everybody has spent this much time on the beta. So I'm very eager to help the community and help people who want to learn, but they need to know that the help is out there. So